All right, today we're going to do something a little different. We're taking a trip back in time. Actually, two trips. First, we're going to the golden age of the Arab Empire, this incredible period of intellectual achievement. And then we're jumping to 1890 to see that same world through the eyes of a Victorian British author who tried to cram its entire history into one little book.
So, that brings us right to the big question. I mean, how on earth do you condense more than 1,000 years of history, of poetry, of science, and philosophy into a single volume? What do you decide to put in? What do you have to leave out? That's the huge challenge our 19th century guide was up against.
And here he is, F.F. Arbuthnot, our author. And you just gotta love the honesty here, right? He's basically saying, look, I'm not reinventing the wheel. He's a compiler, a tour guide for the general reader of his time. So let's dive in and see what this Victorian perspective on a massive empire actually looks like. So Arbuthnot's whole point is, before we can even touch the literature, we have to get our heads around the sheer speed and scale of how this empire was born. It all kicked off with a new faith and then just an explosion of conquest across the map. Now, the thing that's just wild when you look at this timeline is the speed of it all. In just about 100 years after the Prophet Muhammad's death, this empire stretched from the borders of India all the way across North Africa and right into Spain. And then you see this massive power shift. The capital moves from Damascus under the Omaiyides to Baghdad with the new Abbasid dynasty. And that move to Baghdad, well, it wasn't just a political change. It set the stage for a global intellectual boom. But of course, an empire that grows that fast is bound to have some serious internal friction. And Arbuthnot points to this moment, this great schism, as a critical turning point. It was all about who should succeed the prophet. This split between the Sunnis and the Shias happened really early on, and it wasn't just some abstract religious debate. No, this created political fractures that would define the empire, and, they still echo around the world today. Okay, so the empire is established, the new capital Baghdad is thriving, and now the stage is set for this unbelievable flourishing of culture. This is the period that Arbuthnot really zooms in on, this golden age, where the rulers, the caliphs, were pouring money into supporting scholars who were pushing the absolute limits of human knowledge. To really get why the literature just took off, you've got to look at what was there before. The Qasida, this was the foundational poetic form, around even before Islam. Think of it like a really flexible, powerful blueprint for a poem. You could use it to write about anything, a lost love, a battle, the beauty of the desert. This deep, rich tradition of lyrical poetry was the soil where all this new thinking was about to grow. And wow, did it grow. Especially in the sciences. Just look at these names from the world of medicine. Arbuthnot makes a really key point here. Guys like Al-Razi and Ibn Sina were so influential that their names got Latinized. They became Rhazes and Avicenna. Their books were the standard textbooks in European universities for hundreds of years. That's real impact. Arbuthnot includes this incredible little story that just perfectly captures the spirit of the age. So Georgios, who's a Christian physician, is on his deathbed, and the caliph himself offers him the chance to convert to Islam. But Georgios comes back with this witty, totally confident reply. He's basically saying, thanks, but no thanks, I'll stick with my people. And the caliph, instead of being offended, just laughs and gives him a reward. It tells you everything about the intellectual confidence of that court. And this wave of discovery wasn't just in medicine, not by a long shot. You see these huge leaps in chemistry and especially in astronomy. But what's crucial to understand is that these scholars weren't just preserving old Greek texts. They were actively building on them, correcting them. Al-Battani, for instance, took the work of the famous Greek astronomer Ptolemy and made it better, more accurate. And then, of course, you have the philosophers. Thinkers like Al-Kindi and Al-Farabi dove deep into the works of the ancient Greeks, especially Aristotle. They translated them, wrote commentaries, and expanded on their ideas. In a very real way, they were the ones who kept that flame of classical philosophy alive and breathing. And here's maybe the most important takeaway. This wasn't just a few smart people working in isolation. This was a massive, state-sponsored project. Rulers like Caliph al-Ma'mun actively poured money into science. He didn't just build one observatory, he built two. And then he commissioned a huge project to literally measure the size of the planet. We're talking about science on an institutional, national scale. So while Baghdad was the glittering center of all this, the intellectual fire also spread west, all the way to Spain.
And this is where Arbuthnot's story shifts. And he makes this really bold, sweeping claim about the role Arab civilization in Spain played in the history of Europe. And there it is. From his 19th century point of view, this was a massive statement. He's painting a picture of the Spanish Arabs as the sole guardians of knowledge during a time when, he implies, the rest of Europe was stagnating. Now, that framing of the Dark Ages is a bit dated for sure, but his core point about the transfer of knowledge is absolutely huge. So how'd they do it? How'd they keep that light on? Well, Arbuthnot breaks it down into 3 game-changing contributions. First, they built world-class centers of learning, like the University of Cordova. Second, people came from all over Europe to study science and philosophy there. And third, and this might be the biggest one of all, they introduced paper-making to Europe. Just think about that. That single technology completely revolutionized how knowledge could be recorded, copied, and shared. But as we all know, no empire lasts forever. So the final part of Arbuthnot's little book grapples with the decline and with the fate of this immense intellectual legacy that was built over so many centuries. What happens to all of that knowledge when the walls start to crumble? 100,000. Just let that number sink in for a second. 100,000. That's the number of books that one single person, a Spanish cardinal, bragged about burning with his own hands as Christian forces reconquered Spain. It's a staggering, almost impossible number to imagine. For Arbuthnot, this is the ultimate tragedy of the story, a legacy of knowledge that wasn't just lost to time, but was actively, deliberately, and proudly destroyed. And that leaves us with this final, lingering question. You know, Arbuthnot's book itself, with all its Victorian quirks, is a kind of legacy. It makes you wonder, when the great empires fall, when the cities are sacked and the libraries are burned to the ground, what's actually left? What truly survives? Is it the big ideas, the enduring questions, or is it just whatever fragments someone happens to find and piece back together centuries later?